Welcome to the video lecture on Aeschylus's play, Agamemnon. Aeschylus's tragedy, Greek tragedy, Agamemnon. I'm going to, in this video lecture, take our first 10 minutes and talk about the context and history more broadly, a little bit of Greek drama. It's a quick overview, but just some basic tenets that everyone should know about Greek drama before they start reading. And then I'm going to take 30 minutes and talk about the play itself. So 40 minutes total for this video. Okay, learning objectives for today. In that first 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about contextual historical knowledge that everyone should know about Greek tragedy, or at least some of the basics that you should know about Greek tragedy as you're reading. And then students will also describe the place of Agamemnon in the canon of extant Greek drama. So where does this particular play fit? And that's the stuff I'm talking about in the first 10 minutes. And then after that, we'll move to the play itself. I want you to be able to define and analyze 3 Greek words. So we're building on some of the ones we've already heard a little bit about. Words like kleos and time and xenia. And to that list today, we're going to add and extend our knowledge of what hubris is, which means excessive pride. Polis, which I mentioned very briefly, referring to a city-state and the people within the city-state. And oikos, which is a smaller family unit, which is your family and your household, the people who live in your household. And we're going to talk about loyalties between whether you're loyal to the polis or oikos, but we'll get there. I want students to be able to compare Homer's version of the story to Aeschylus's. So we're going to jump back for just a moment and look at Book 11 of the Odyssey one more time and just remind ourselves what Homer had to say about this story and then see how Aeschylus has expanded it. And then, of course, students will recall key characters, events, and themes that I'll be talking about from the play, from Aeschylus's play, Agamemnon. Okay, so to get started, just thinking about this broad historical context in which we're working. So Greek epic poetry is a different genre than Greek tragedy. So we're talking about a different kind of literature, and we're also talking about a little bit different time period. So remember, the Greek epic poems started off completely as an oral tradition. It involved a bard singing the story of the Odyssey, the Iliad, and there were some other epic poems that got lost. So singing those, and the bard would take 3 days to sing this song, and it was a great gathering of the community, the oiko, or the polis, we could call it. We'll get to that term, as I said earlier. We'll get there in a minute. Coming together to listen to the bards sing this story. Now, when we get to the 5th century BC, so we're talking about a period 2,500 years ago, not quite as far back as when Homer would have been singing the epic poems, if there was indeed a Homer. We'll just say, the bards who sang that oral tradition over the centuries and who we attribute to Homer. That was before, though, so that's older. So when you're thinking about the oldest literature, both of these types of literature, Greek epic poetry and Greek drama, are both very, they are ancient literatures, but epic poetry comes first, at least in terms of the order it was written in. And what we have in Greek tragedy then is building upon that tradition. So it's rooted deeply in the tradition of Homer, but it expands a lot on many of the stories. And we're going to find over the centuries that people take the stories of Homer and expand upon them. And then they'll take the stories of Aeschylus, the playwright who wrote today's play, and they'll expand upon those as well. And there's a really fascinating way that these stories keep getting told and retold over the centuries. That's really fascinating. Retold and expanded upon and tweaked and changed, and following and tracing that history is fascinating stuff. So, all right, so by the time we get to the 5th century BCE, in Athens, instead of having just one person sing for 3 days, instead you would have a series of plays that would happen over a course of 3 days. So it is a different genre, but you can see how it builds upon the old epic poems. And instead of having just one person sing, you would bring out a group of people to sing. There would always be music and dance to these. We've lost the music and the dance to it. We don't know what the music sounded like, but we have the words, we have the lyrics. It's a bit like if we had, imagine a time 2,000 years from now, and people have access to Taylor Swift's, or fill in the blank with whatever musician there you want, have the words to her songs, but not the music anymore. They can't hear what it sounded like. And that's where we're at. We're stuck there. because unfortunately there wasn't a way to preserve that music. So we have the words, and we're working from the words. So people would gather together for 3 days, and they would listen to 3 sets of plays over those 3 days. It would be a festival. It's rooted in a religious festival for the god Dionysus. So Dionysus is sometimes attributed as a patron of theater, although it's kind of an interesting mix. We'll talk more about Dionysus in later plays. He comes up and is very important. Anyway, Dionysus as sort of this god of theater, or at least the person who these plays end up being given to in honor of, right, at his festival. 3 plays each day by 3 different playwrights over a course of 3 days. So you get this big party of 9 plays. And actually there were you get 3 bonus plays too. So there'd be 3 tragedies that would go in a row, and then you get what's called a satyr play, which is shorter and funnier and a little bit different genre than the tragedies. So actually you get 4 plays from each playwright, but it's really the tragedies that get the most attention and that we talk about the most, and that have come down to us 2,500 years later. So we're talking. So today we're talking about just one play, Aeschylus's Agamemnon. When it would have been performed, though, it was performed with 2 other plays. There was another play that would have been performed directly afterward called The Libation Bearers. And then there was a 3rd play that would have been performed called The Eumenides. And then on the 2nd and 3rd day, another playwright would get a chance to present his plays. Now, what's really curious about this particular group of 3 plays, starting with the Agamemnon, is that we actually still have all 3 of them. We have Agamemnon, we have the play of The Libation Bearers, and we have the play The Eumenides. And we're just talking about Agamemnon today, but you can go on and read those other 2 plays, and it continues the story of what's happened. They go in order. Now, that's really a great thing that we have that, because we don't have that for any of the other days. So we estimate, scholars estimate, that about 1,000 plays were written in the 5th century BCE. Of those, only 33 of the tragedies. Let me clarify. Of the tragedies, there were about 1,000 written, and only 33 survived. The rest are gone. And that's very sad to think about all those lost plays, right? And what other stories are told that could have taught us about the ancient Greeks that we could have had, but they're gone. But the silver lining, I suppose, is there's only 33 of them, and they take maybe hour and a half to read each one. You can read all 33. You can know all the Greek plays that still exist. And in a way, that's kind of nice. If there were 1,000 still, I don't know that any one person would. You'd have to be a pretty intense scholar to read all 1,000 plays, right? So just an average everyday person can read all 33 plays. Okay, so 33 out of 1,000 still have survived. The rest, they just disappeared, right? They probably were written down at some point. But those they're just gone. It's like it's a lost book that will never be found. So yeah, 33 out of 1,000 plays still exist. I think that's important, and it's fascinating when we think about how much has been lost. Okay, let's go ahead and jump now specifically into talking about the Agamemnon or Agamemnon. Let me give me a moment here to figure out where I'm at. Here we are. So the play opens. This play opens with a watchman sitting on a rooftop, and we are right at the end of the Trojan War. So if you think about the events of the Iliad ended just before the end of the Trojan War. We're just a few days after the end of the Trojan War now, or actually, we would be this would actually be the evening in which the Trojan War ended and the Greeks sacked Troy. And you'll remember in book 9 of the Odyssey, Odysseus tells that story of the Trojan horse. I'm sorry, in book 8, and it's Demodocus who sings it, right? Got that a little mixed up. Demodocus sings it in book 8, right? The story of the Trojan horse. All right, anyway, so the watchman here is at the end of the Trojan War, and he's going to tell us he's been waiting for 10 years to find out what happened in the wars. He's back home in Agamemnon's kingdom in Argos, and everyone's been waiting. Okay, so when we talk about Greek tragedy, I'm reminded of something else I wanted to mention too. So I said, we went from the bard as one person singing the songs to a whole group of people. That group of people was a chorus, and one or two people would step out of the chorus then and converse with the chorus, and act out a certain part. So the first part we get is the watchman. Let's take a look at his opening lines to open the play. You got to imagine this is a guy who's been waiting for 10 years for a signal to come that the Trojan War has ended. He says, "I beg you, gods, release me from this drudgery, this year long spent as lookout. This time I've crouched through like some watchdog, bedded up here on the palace roof of Atreus' sons. Sons, remember Agamemnon and Menelaus. I've got to know the gathering of the stars, distinguishing those sparkling dynasties which bring the winter and the summer with their rise and fall. And now I'm watching for a token marked in flame, the gleam of fire that brings a word from Troy, the message it has fallen." So there's a system that's been set up, a signal fire, and it's going to be referred to, we see it again right here, the beacon. We're going to hear Clytemnestra talk about it. Clytemnestra is the wife of Agamemnon. She gets mentioned briefly in Book 1 of the Iliad. Agamemnon said that he loved Chryseis in Book 1 of the Iliad more than his own wife, Clytemnestra. So that's an important detail to keep in mind from the Iliad, right? Anyway, so we've got these signal fires. And so that means that there is, later in a little bit, you've read Clytemnestra. Oh, and remember too, if you haven't read the play yet, pause here, go through and watch the play before you read the play. We don't get to watch the play. Read the play before you watch the video lecture. And when you get to the part where Clytemnestra is talking, she lists all the different signal fires. So the first one starts on Mount Ida, which is in Troy. And so there's a fire ready to go there at any moment, and it will light a fire on top of that mountain. Then there's people on another nearby mountain who will see that fire, and then they have their own to light. And then from mountain peak to mountain peak, the fires will go off until eventually the message gets back to Sparta, to Clytemnestra. And the only thing the message means is that Troy has fallen and the Greeks have won. And she's been waiting for 10 years to hear this. And this watchman has been waiting for 10 years to hear this. And all of a sudden, at the very beginning of the play, we get it. Silence while he watches. He sees the distant beacon. The beacon, welcome, beaming through this night as bright as day. So I don't have a visual element to show you from the Agamemnon of this, but I am reminded of a scene in the third Lord of the Rings movie, Return of the King, where we see the same kind of apparatus happening. There's a similar moment. So I've actually got that booted up. I'm going to go ahead and share that with you now. Let's find it here. Yes. So this is Pippin, if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings. And in the movies, Pippin goes up here on the signal fire, and he lights it. He's kind of not supposed to light it. Anyway, this isn't a class about Lord of the Rings, but you see he lights it, and then just let me jump ahead. It takes him a moment to get it lit. Here he's got it lit, a little bit in. The guard sees it. What's happening? These are the guys who were supposed to light it if they'd been ordered to. They hadn't been ordered. Pippin sneaks in and does it. That's different than the book, by the way. In the book, Pippin isn't the one who lights it, but in the movie he is. There's Gandalf coming out, and he sees and once it's lit, you can't stop, right? You can't stop it. And here you see the next mountain, it lights up. Gandalf sees that the signal is moving, and this is going to call for help. So it's going to end up getting all the way to Aragorn, and ends in Rohan, with Rohan coming then to help, to come to Gondor's aid. So here we see it on this mountaintop. These guys, it's their job when they see it to light it, so they suddenly see their signal, so they light it. And this is just an ancient way of delivering a message. This is a time there's no cell phones, there's no telephones, there's no telegrams, there's none of that kind of technology. So we have these signal fires. This is how they were to communicate. And this is actually, this could be the image. We could imagine this crossing from Troy all the way to Sparta this way too. So here's another fire going off, and so on, and the fire in the distance here. Then this one is going to light up in a moment. There it goes. Right. So in your mind, this is an important part of Agamemnon, and I don't have the film for the version in our play, but here we see the signal fires, and finally here in the end, in just a moment, it gets all the way to Aragorn, the same way that the original signal fire got all the way to Sparta, and Clytemnestra was able to see it, even above the clouds. And here it is at the very end, the last fire. And imagine this is our watchman who's been waiting all this time, sees the fire. It's not the watchman, that's Aragorn, but you get the sense of that, right? Okay, so let's jump back to our text. So we've got this watchman waiting for that signal fire, and finally it comes. And then the chorus comes in. He goes, and a chorus of elders enter. So keep in mind, so these guys have been in the Trojan War lasted 10 years, right? And remember, we've read the Odyssey too, so we're jumping around on our timeline. We've seen what happens in the Odyssey all the way up to 20 years after Odysseus left. Here we're at 10 years after Agamemnon and after the war started. So we're right in the, most of the stories that we're reading sort of happen on this 20-year timeline with the start of the Trojan War here. Some of the stories come a little before, and a lot of the stories we're reading, a few of the stories we're reading come kind of after Odysseus gets home. Actually, none that we're reading in this class. Everything that we're talking about when you talk about Greek stuff is before the Odysseus is getting home. Is the last little bit we get. All right, anyway, so here we are. The Trojan War's just ended. The signal has been sent. The watchman sees it, and he jumps up, and he's very happy. And we get our chorus coming on. And keep in mind, these are old men, because they were too old 10 years ago to go to war, right? You can't go to war if you're an old man, or at least not very many can. We get Nestor. He's a great example in the Iliad of a very old man who's at war, but he's different. He's kind of special, right? Most old men can't go to war at a certain age. And now these old men are not only old men, but they're 10 years older than 10 years before when they were old men. So they're even older men. And they make up the chorus. And they're the ones who are sort of telling the story along with these actors who come on and off stage. And so they talk about Priam, Agamemnon. And here they mention kind of who they are. As for us, back then, line 75, we had no strength to offer with our wasted muscles, because they're old men. So we stayed behind here, propped up on these wooden crutches. There's no camp for war within us. And the very old, with leafage dry, it's a nice little metaphor, like imagine that they're like the old leaves on a tree, or at least their muscles are like the old leaves on a tree, already withered, drift on triple-footed journeys. I like that triple-footed because, as they mentioned, they walk on a cane. They've got a wooden crutch or a cane, so they have 3 feet instead of 2. All right, and then they wonder, what's the news? What's going on? They know something's happened, right? And they're very excited. And but before we get to the action of the play, just like we saw in epic poetry, there's lots of meta-narrative happening. There's stories within stories. And these stories that they tell are important background information. So we just like we had to get used to with epic poetry, you just sort of have to realize there's going to be some tangents. We're going to have some points where we go off and tell another story. And they're going to go back in time 10 years and talk about what the prophet Calchas saw and the prophecy he gave. So let's read that, starting at line 135. Once proper times pass by, this invading force is bound to conquer Troy. The city sacked and its human animals massacred in flocks within their own walls. My only fear is that some god will take offense and stain the curb of Troy tarnished in advance. For Artemis is stirred by compassion's pangs, resents her father's cruel terriers with wings. So the sign that Calchas saw was 2 eagles killing a pregnant rabbit. The eagle being a symbol of Zeus, the rabbit, the pregnant rabbit, or the young of any animal is Artemis's domain. So she doesn't like seeing her father's terriers with wings, his eagles, sacrifice the hare's stillborn babies. It is this eagle's feast Artemis detests. So Artemis does not, 10 years ago, want the Trojan War to happen. And at least according to Calchas. This is what Calchas says before they go. So we're jumping through time. So we started talking about the end of the Trojan War, which begins the story of the Agamemnon, but now we're getting some more backstory, filling in some gaps that Homer left out, right? This was what Calchas prophesied, jumping over here to line 176. This was what Calchas prophesied from the bird signs, mixed with good for the royal household as they departed. So they made their way, so this is, Priam and Hecuba are in Troy. Paris is sailing back there with Helen right now, and all the Greeks are getting ready to go to the fight, right, as they departed for war. So we keep going just a little bit more, and the Greeks all get camped at a place called Aulis, on its sandy shore. They've got all their boats pulled up. They've built a camp, and they're on their way. But there's an unrelenting wind from the northeast, sent them idleness and hunger. So they're stuck there. They can't continue on the war because Artemis is angry. And so they go back to like, wait, why? Okay, you said Artemis would be angry. What do we have to do to get her to let us go to Troy? And Calchas says, well, you have to sacrifice your daughter, his daughter Iphigenia, Agamemnon's daughter. You have to sacrifice your own daughter. And he does. And this is where, there's a lot of ways to read this. It's very hard to feel sympathetic to Agamemnon when we know he killed his own daughter so that he'd be able to go to war. But from Agamemnon's warrior code and from his sense of pride, he felt he had to do it for, and this is where that idea of polis comes in, for his palace, for Sparta, for his people, his whole people. And as a leader, he believes that he needs to be willing to make sacrifices within his own oikos or family. So one of the things I want to talk about this play in class, I want to talk about that balance. How do you balance your duty to oikos, to your family, against your duty to polis, right? And which one is more important? And we can ask that of ourselves as just regular everyday people, but then also ask yourself, what do you want from your leaders? Do you want a leader who really puts their own family's interests ahead of that of the polis? So it is a complex, difficult question. It's hard to like Agamemnon for what he does here, but I think if we really think about the situation and his sense of values, we can understand why he makes this horrible sacrifice and decision. And there's some really brutal language about him sacrificing her. I'll let you reread that on your own. It's quite brutal language. But he does it, and Artemis then lets him go to war. And the question becomes, why would Artemis, a goddess who protects young animals and young girls, want Iphigenia sacrificed? And I don't know if there's an easy answer to that question, but I think the answer is that Artemis wants Agamemnon to understand the pain he's going to inflict in Troy on other people. He's got to suffer alongside them with the same thing. And we're going to see later in the play when he brings back Cassandra. Cassandra is a princess, a daughter of Priam, of Troy. He's going to inflict this pain on others, of kidnapping and enslaving wives and daughters. He needs to understand firsthand just how painful this thing is that he's about to do. And remember, we also have the issue of Moira. Artemis can't stop the Trojan War from happening. Just like Poseidon could not stop Odysseus from getting home. Just like Zeus cannot swoop in and save his son Sarpedon in the Iliad, right? The gods cannot change somebody's Moira. They're a lot, but they can make it hard on other people that they don't like, or they can find ways to make the enemies of their favorites suffer more, right? Poseidon makes it hard for Odysseus to get home. Sarpedon comes in and at least saves the body Zeus comes in and has Apollo bring the body of Sarpedon in the Iliad back to his homeland so it can get proper burial, right? So we do have examples where the gods are always there, they're always present, but they can't change final outcomes. Anyway, so Artemis is going to make this hard on Agamemnon. You have to sacrifice something you love dearly, and he does it. And here in these passages, I had highlighted them before as I prepared the video lecture, but now as I look at them, I'm not going to read them out loud. they're quite graphic in their description. Clytemnestra next, right? We get to scene 2. Clytemnestra comes out, and here she's describing that fire, that signal fire. So it starts in Mount Ida, jumps to Lemnos, Athos, Peperathos, Makistos, Messapion, and so on until it gets here. She says, my relay race of beacons carried to its end by handing on from one stage to the next. So this is how she knows, because the chorus leader stepped out of the chorus and asked, how do you know that the war's ended? And she says, this is how I know. And it's an important symbol throughout the play, that this idea of the signal fire of information being passed from one person to another, right? And how do you know the truth of what's happening? And here she imagines this as it's happening. She says the Greeks are occupying Troy this very day, and she knows it because she saw the signal fire. And I imagine there's a discordant shouting in the town. But she's also worried, and she goes on here in this part to talk about there's two different sides to every war, and there's shouting. The men who have won are happy, but those who have lost are devastated at what's to become of them. And the Greek world is brutal, and it's horrible to be. Most of the men are going to be killed. Women and children are going to be enslaved. And we're going to see Cassandra as an example in a moment of that. We saw in the Iliad, we saw examples with Chryseis and Briseis. In book 1 of the Iliad, we saw that too, right? But she's also worried that the Greeks might go too far in their plunder. I fear, though, that the lust to plunder what they should not may invade the troops as they give in to greed. Remember, they have yet to make their journey safely back around the homeward section of the course. And remember, our word for that is nostos. Odysseus had his great nostos, Nostos, to get home. Agamemnon is going to get his nostos too, but his is going to be almost instant. He sails home in just a matter of a few days, whereas Odysseus, it takes him 10 years to get home. And so the chorus leader says, "You've spoken, woman, shrewdly as a man, one of good sense." There's several points in the play where Clytemnestra is compared to a man. And I'm not sure if it's meant to be a compliment or an insult. But she has, Agamemnon's been off to war. She has been in charge back home. And she has led like a man. So it's an interesting bit, and I think there's different ways to read and understand that. But certainly the chorus leader is a little suspicious of her, though. He doesn't completely trust her, and rightfully so. He's been seeing signs for 10 years of things. Let's skip down just a little bit. Let me point out, too, some of these chorus bits we get here. I'm not diving too far in depth just because of time. I'm trying to hurry along. But remember, these are songs meant to be sung. In just the way that if you just listen to the song lyrics of a favorite song, if you know the music and you know the song, they make perfect sense. But they're harder to decipher without the music. So remember, these are bits of songs, choral songs that are being sung. So if they seem a little bit difficult, that's kind of why. It'd be like listening or reading the lyrics of a song without being able to hear the music. Here we get another reference to the beacons, and we get to scene 3, more about the beacons, and a herald shows up. So there's always sort of this character who played the watchman has gone backstage. He's changed, and really in Greek theater there wasn't much to change. They wore a mask over their face, so he changes his mask, comes back out. Now he's a herald. He says, "I've been gone 10 long years, and I've returned from the war." I have to imagine at least a couple of days have passed. It's going to take him some time to get home. Maybe even a couple of weeks have passed, somewhere between scenes 2 and 3, because you couldn't have won the battle in one day and be home the next. So there's got to be a little time that's passed, even though the text doesn't say so explicitly. The herald comes back and makes that announcement. Clytemnestra comes out. She mentions her beacon fires again, and the news is delivered from. It's reinforced that yes, the Trojans are defeated. The Greeks are victorious. And there's an interesting tidbit here I just wanted to point out. We know what happened to Odysseus. We're going to find out what happens to Agamemnon. And here's the question: what of Menelaus? The chorus asks. And the herald doesn't know. He says, but tell me, herald, what of Menelaus? Is he the much-loved ruler of this land returning safe along with you? And the herald says, no, he's disappeared. And if we've read books 3 and 4 of the Odyssey, we know that Menelaus and Helen appear in those books, and indeed Menelaus eventually makes it home, but he's going to have a long journey home too. It's going to take about some 8 years, not quite as long as Odysseus, but he gets stuck with Helen in Egypt for a while, and that's a whole other story. But it gets mentioned here, right? All these stories upon stories and layers of storytelling that I find so interesting. All right, so let's jump back down here, and let's jump down to scene 4 as I move right along. And here Agamemnon is finally home, and he brings Cassandra. Cassandra's an interesting character. Just give me a minute, and I'm going to talk about her just a bit more. And of course, the chorus welcomes him home. Welcome, mighty sovereign, sacker of the Trojan city, son of Atreus. And there's a little warning at the end of their speech to him, though. The chorus leader says, as time passes, you will discover which among the city's keepers have been honest, which corrupted. If you read the note here, the chorus tries to warn Agamemnon against flatterers and dissemblers, but he misses its drift, and that's going to be Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra is the one that he can't trust. And then Clytemnestra comes out next, and she's brought this giant set of tapestries for him to walk upon as he walks home, or carpets. And this gets called the carpet scene by scholars. And Agamemnon doesn't want to walk across these beautiful carpets. And remember, but carpets is the wrong word. Tapestry is a better word in English. These are works of art meant to be hung on the wall, works of needlepoint meant to be hung up on the wall that took women hundreds of work hours to put together, to create. So these are also the works of women that Clytemnestra is laying for him to walk upon. It'd be a bit if I were to take the Mona Lisa off the wall of the Louvre and say, here, walk across this. You deserve it because you're such a great warrior and a great person. I hope everyone who would say, no, I wouldn't want to step on the Mona Lisa. And that's a horrible thought if someone's stepping on it. And that's going to be Agamemnon's response, too. Clytemnestra says, come, women, get on with your task of spreading fabrics all along the pathway he will walk. Yes, let us have a passage strewn with purple, so that justice may escort him well inside a home that lies beyond his hopes. So walk this purple along these purple tapestries. And Agamemnon's like, no, that's not right. Do not pamper me in female fashion. Interesting choice, way to put that. He doesn't want to be treated like a woman, nor like some barbarian bow down to me with gawping salutations. And stop this spreading of my path with woven stuff, which might attract resentment. And here we get to our idea of hubris. Hubris is excessive pride, and excessive pride is a great sin in the Greek world. And you can loosely define it as comparing yourself to a god, or doing something or having something that should be reserved for a god. And you will upset the gods if you commit an act of hubris. And he says here, for mortals to take steps upon such ornaments, upon the tapestry of beauty, is in my belief a thing that's fraught with fear. So pay me homage like a man, I say, not like a god. I don't want to do this. This is something maybe a god could do, but no human deserves to walk on these tapestries. But she argues with him and says, no, you deserve it. I want you to. And he eventually gives in and says, all right, he does. At this point over here, but he takes his boots off. I think that's an interesting point. He unlaces his boots. So at least not walk with him at his boots. As a way of trying to sort of compromise and not do this, but still do it. We get to here, he brings attention to Cassandra, and Cassandra has come with him, the Trojan princess, all the way from Troy. Think of, she's in the same vein of people as sort of as Chryseis, who he gave back. And he goes inside, and he leaves Cassandra outside. And Cassandra's a fascinating character. Clytemnestra is trying to get her to go inside too. But she has the gift of prophecy. So her story, she was once beloved of by Apollo. Apollo was in love with her, and she promised Apollo that she would have sex with him. And then she backed out at the last minute. Well, he had given her a gift. He had given her the gift of prophecy. That's Apollo's specialty, is he can see the future, right? And he had given that gift to her. That's why his people can see the future. Some of them can. And she could see the future. But then when she wouldn't have sex with him, he cursed her. And he said, okay, you can still see the future, but nobody will believe you. And that turns out to be a horrible curse, because she can look backwards and she can see all the horrible things that have happened in the past, and she can see forward and she sees what's about to happen inside that house. And you have to remember on stage too, so there's a little building, the Skene building it's called, that they've walked into, and there's this purple carpet. The visual effect would be like blood, I think, flowing out of this house. So she sees that not just figuratively, but literally. And if we go through this, she lets out, the translators left these Greek rhythmic cries that she lets out. And when we read these, if performed by a really good actress, this is going to be powerful and moving on stage, of her grief and her fear about what's going to happen to her when she walks into the building. But eventually, oh yes, I wanted to point this out too. She's also looking backward. And we're going to get to this. This is a really important part. So we keep hearing Agamemnon and Menelaus referred to as the sons of Atreus. Well, Atreus, their father, everyone in their family line is horrible and has done horrible things. And Atreus did a horrible thing to his own brother. So he kicked his own brother out of the kingdom, exiled him, but then he invites him back in a really weird way. Invites him back, and then he feeds his brother his own children, his own nephews, right? So this man, the brother or uncle, it'd be the uncle to Agamemnon, eats his own children. It's horrible. And he feels horrible about it. He's destroyed inside when he realizes that his children have been killed and then served up in a meal. And Cassandra can see all, like there's so many layers of stories that have happened in the house of Atreus that keep going back in time, and they'll go forward in time too, because remember I said there's two more plays after Agamemnon. So these cycles of family violence just keep repeating themselves in this house, and Cassandra can see all of it, and it's horrible. These little ones bewailing their own cruel killing and the roasted meat their father had to eat. Ugh, ugh. Anyway, and we'll get back to that at the end, actually, because one of the brothers of those children is still alive, Aegisthus, and he's going to be the one who helps to kill Agamemnon along. He has taken, Aegisthus is now the lover of Clytemnestra, and together Clytemnestra and Aegisthus are about to do this horrible tragedy. Here Cassandra explains how she has his power. She sees Thyestes, that's the uncle who eats his own children, the feast of children's meat. Speed right along. Let's get down here. And eventually she goes inside. Now I shall go inside and sing laments for Agamemnon and myself. Enough of life, strangers, I ask you this, bear witness after I am dead that I was right. And all of a sudden scene 7 opens, and you just hear Agamemnon from inside the Skene building screaming, I've been struck, deep, fatal, I'm struck again. And they know it's the king. Like, what do we do? Oh my gosh, he's been struck, he's been stabbed. And Clytemnestra in scene 8 comes out and takes credit for having murdered him. And she didn't just stab him twice. She says she actually, after he was dead, stabbed him a 3rd time, too. I cast around him an impenetrable mesh. So she caught him in a net. She's put him in the bathtub. She's helping him bathe and get cleaned up. And then she throws a net over him, like one for netting fish, a fatal luxury of fabric. Then I struck him twice, and those are the 2 cries we heard, right? He went limp. And when he was down, I followed with a 3rd. After he was already dead, I stabbed him a 3rd time, right? And they're astounded at what he's done. Why would you do this? And she's going to say, I did it for my child, for Iphigenia. 10 years I've been planning this. And I killed him for it. And I always planned to kill him after he killed my daughter. I've been planning this for 10 years as soon as he got back, that I would do this. I will never forgive him for killing Iphigenia. So she kills him with 3 quick stabs, and then she kills Cassandra too in there, together with Aegisthus' help. Clytemnestra says to the chorus, in my judgment this man's death was no more squalid than was fitting. It is right that he has perished through deception, since he ruined this whole family with deception. Yes, the darling, that's Iphigenia, that I bore him, dearly wept Iphigenia. He, her father, made his victim. Now he suffered suitably to match his actions. He will have no cause to bluster down in Hades. Now he's paid by his final sword stroke. And just real quick, we got to see him down in Hades, remember, in book 11 of the Odyssey. And here, where am I? It was Aegisthus who planned. So this is Agamemnon talking to Odysseus. I switched books. I'm in the Odyssey for a moment, book 11, back to that. And he says, what a dreadful death. And he says it was Aegisthus who planned my death and murdered me with help from my own wife. He called me to his house to dinner, and he killed me as one slaughters an ox at manger. So he indeed down in the underworld, and he's suffering. He's not happy down in the underworld, and he's warning Odysseus. And we talked about this passage before, but I really want to point out though that Homer doesn't give Clytemnestra any voice here to explain herself and why she did what she did. That's a bit that Aeschylus adds to the story, giving the women in the story a voice. Cassandra and Clytemnestra get to talk and explain themselves in this one in a way that Homer didn't let them do when they were telling this story. Homer has lots of women who speak, and women get important parts in Homer, but he didn't give one to Clytemnestra. This was Aeschylus adding on to the story in a really cool way, and in a way that keeps happening. It's a tradition. We get to keep adding on to these stories too. Deepening them. That's part of what we do in the creative writing assignments in this class, deepening these stories. One last speech to look at. So then Clytemnestra has come out, and then Aegisthus comes out, and he gives his story too. His father was forced to eat his own children. Now Thyestes was born after that, so he was not one of the children who was eaten, but he wants revenge still for what happened to his father. Your father did this to my father. They were brothers, and they deserve this. And then, just for the sake of time, I'm going to jump over this very important speech. But it goes into what Aegisthus was forced to do or tricked into doing. A little reference to Orpheus. I love the myth of Orpheus. And then they pick on Aegisthus, and it's really interesting. Aegisthus is a very interesting, almost funny character in some ways, because he's poking at the chorus. And Clytemnestra has an interesting point. She says, let's not do more damage. We've already reaped enough unhappy harvest. Let's not have yet further bloodshed. She stops it there. And they're going to, for a short time, but there's 2 more plays. And their son, Orestes, Agamemnon and Clytemnestra's son, Orestes, is going to come home, and it's his responsibility now to revenge his father's death. And that's the stuff of the second play. And then the third play in the trilogy, remember there's 3 plays, and we have all 3. And then the third play is the Eumenides, and then it's Orestes being punished for what he does in the second play. So it's just these cycles of family violence. All right, hope you enjoyed this discussion and video lecture on the Agamemnon. Thank you, everybody.